So today, Lynn is going to be talking about making and approving a safe and effective vaccine. I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone is muted, and please use the chat box for your questions. You're going to go to all of us on the panel, and we'll all be able to answer your questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, we will answer your questions through the chat box. After Lynn is done with her presentation, we'll do a Q&A, and I will read the questions out loud, and someone on our panel will answer the questions. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on our website after. And now I will turn it over to Lynn.
Thank you, Carly, and welcome. Good afternoon to more than 1,100 participants. Glad that you can join us today. And okay. Whoops. Well, I'm going way ahead of myself. I'm sorry. So our objective today is for me to talk a little bit about the typical process that it takes to get FDA licensure, particularly for a vaccine. And then I'll talk about some ways that the vaccine process allows for a shortened process, or this Operation Warp Speed that we keep hearing about. And then talk a little bit about what is being done to ensure that the vaccines coming out are safe and effective. So hopefully this will give you kind of a real broad overview. We won't get into specific details about the vaccines this week, but that's coming up. So, and this has actually changed as of this weekend. We have about nearly 250 vaccines under development globally. And now there are 10 vaccines in the U.S. that are in some stage of research. And we have now 5 manufacturers that are in phase 3 trials, and then the rest are in phase 1 or phase 2. And we expect that at least 1, if not 2 products will be available by the end of this year, and probably even sooner than that. So these are, okay, voice is garbled on your speaker. Are other people hearing garbling? Okay. Maybe try to use, if you've got some headphone or headset, that might help. All right, so things probably will ramp up fairly quickly in the next month, just in time for Christmas, of course. And so let's talk a little bit about how vaccines get recommended. And this is a very gross picture, not gross, but a very crude picture of how this happens. Typically, basic research happens, and sometimes it happens for years and years. For example, for the past 25 years or so, there has been research trying to develop a vaccine to prevent droopy strep in infants. And so far, they haven't been able to get past the basic research. We know that for coronavirus, there has a lot of research started back in the early 2000s when we first saw the SARS-1 illness happening. And so a lot of that research has been underway over the last 2 decades. And so that is part of the reason why we see a lot of time that it takes to get a vaccine to market. Typically, once basic research is conducted, especially some preliminary vaccine work on usually non-human primates, If the results show that the primates did okay and mounted an immune response, then the researchers will begin to look for humans that would be willing to participate in that first phase of study. And again, this phase is specifically to look at, is it safe to give this product to human beings? And it typically involves several dozen individuals, so a very small number of people. And if people tolerate it well, then they go on to say, okay, so it's safe. Are there certain dosages that work better than other dosages? And so that becomes phase 2. And they usually recruit several hundred people into those studies, and along with looking at what is the best dose for this vaccine to be effective, they're still watching safety. You know, now that we've vaccinated several hundred people, are we seeing anything that we should be worried about? If signals of any safety issue, and if they are able to determine a dose that might work, then they go into phase 3 clinical trials. And in that situation, they're studying both the safety and the effectiveness. They're typically enrolling tens of thousands of people. And they're usually doing a study that's randomized, picking people at random, and that there's a placebo involved. So some people are getting the vaccine and some people are getting a placebo. Typically that placebo can be normal saline. In some instances, they might use a different vaccine that has already been studied and proved safe, just so that the people not getting that vaccine that's being studied get some benefit, even though they're not getting that vaccine. So phase 3, depending on what the goal points are, can take anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years. And again, it depends on how fast they can recruit people to be a part of the study, how much money the manufacturer has to put toward the research, and then how common the disease is that they're looking at. For some diseases where we've seen a lot of elimination, for example, something like pertussis, where it's fairly well controlled in the U.S., it's hard to get enough data to compare vaccinated against unvaccinated, because it's hard for people to get sick against the disease because of the way the disease is controlled. So that's part of the reason we see long time frames for clinical studies. Once there's enough data both for safety and for showing effectiveness, the manufacturer will gather up all of that data and submit an application to the FDA for licensure. And the FDA will review all of that data. They will present that data to an advisory group that will determine whether is there adequate data, are there questions that we don't, that haven't been answered, that we want them to go back and look at before we consider moving forward in licensure. When that happens, if they say, yes, we have enough data to show that this vaccine is safe and effective, then the FDA goes through a process of examining the manufacturing process for that vaccine. So they'll look into issues of purity and consistency. How are they manufacturing this product, and are they using best manufacturing procedures to do that? If they believe that they've got a consistent, pure, safe, effective vaccine, then they will license that vaccine. once a vaccine is licensed, that triggers another advisory group to look at the data and say, okay, how are we going to recommend this vaccine? And they start looking at who is impacted by the disease. Are there certain people that are affected more severely than other people? They look at, okay, if we recommend this vaccine for everyone, what's the benefit over the cost? What are the harms over the benefits? So maybe 50% of people get vaccinated, run a fever the next day. Is that something tolerable against the disease that we're trying to protect against? So all of those things are reviewed, and this advisory group, and it's, the abbreviations are ACIP, and it stands for the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, will make a vaccine recommendation. Sometimes the vaccine is recommended for everyone. Sometimes it's recommended for specific groups of people. An example of that are a lot of the pediatric vaccines that are recommended for young children who are often most impacted by certain diseases. And so depending on the vaccine, it will have the vaccine recommendations reflect the data that they have to make that recommendation. And so once the vaccine is recommended, that's when clinics begin to start using it. And clinics may begin to start using that vaccine once it has been licensed by FDA. But many insurers for vaccines will wait until ACIP makes a recommendation before they will cover that vaccine. So there's a distinction there. You can give a licensed product to anyone for whom it's indicated, but the person might have to check to make sure that insurance will cover it, or they'll have to pay out of pocket. But once that vaccine is on the market to be used, it has been recommended, a whole new system for monitoring the safety of that vaccine is put in place. And again, they look at when you're giving this product to millions of people, are there any very rare side effects that we're seeing? And there are about 4 or 5 systems in place to look at that. Some that are run by the FDA and some that are run by CDC, and some that are run in tandem with CDC and the FDA. So that's kind of the pathway to vaccine recommendations. That surveillance in phase 4 is ongoing for as long as that product is licensed and being used. Those surveillance systems are in place. Typically, if you're going to begin to see any rare serious adverse event, it usually happens within it's usually picked up in the first year of use. So that is the pathway to vaccine recommendation. So how did we, and typically we're looking at probably at least 5 to 10 years. With better technology, some of that can be sped up. And so just to let you know what's been happening with Operation Warp Speed is that a lot of the basic research, as I mentioned, had already been done. And sometimes the challenge is finding the right protein found in that germ, found in the virus or in the bacteria that causes our human bodies to create an antibody against that protein. And we were able to identify that really quickly with the SARS-2 virus. What happened in deciding to make a vaccine is that private companies, public government entities, and clinical experts all joined together to work together on this rather than one manufacturer decided, oh, we're going to make a vaccine. Let's make sure we've got the funding to start phase 1 study. Let's make sure we've got the funding to start phase 2. Let's make sure we have the funding to start phase 3. We're not going to start manufacturing the vaccine until we know that we've got a safe and effective vaccine. They have pushed together the recruitment. There have been monies that have been dedicated to expedite the recruiting of individuals and doing the research itself, where it's unprecedented. Typically that does not happen. So a lot of the clinical studies have been condensed, which allows for a faster collection of the data that we need for safety and effectiveness. In addition, there's been active involvement of independent experts who have been reviewing the data so that the manufacturer doesn't see the blinded data, but is at least getting updates on a monthly basis that yes, we're not seeing any safety problems. Yes, people seem to be tolerating this, and we might be seeing some effect, positive effect of the vaccine against disease. And that's what's been happening. That's why we've got some preliminary data. Typically that doesn't always happen in the regular pathway to vaccination. It's because the independent board is looking at the data separate from the company so that they can continue that clinical trial in the best protocol as possible. The in-depth safety review has not been changed, but the data is being presented to them early. So in a typical clinical trial, one of the things we always want to look at is, well, how long will protection last? And because we are making a vaccine to address an urgent, severe pandemic, we have to set aside some of those things that we would typically know. So all of us will be learning how long this vaccine will work. We don't have that data yet, even as we begin to possibly use that data. In this situation, what these companies are going to be doing is requesting that the vaccine be authorized to be used in an emergency. And so we do sacrifice knowing some information. But the safety review is still ongoing, and if the FDA does grant an authorization for emergency use, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices will take that data, and they have formed a subgroup that will independently review the data that FDA has reviewed. So there's an extra review of that safety data and the effectiveness so that we can make a more informed decision about who should get the vaccine and who should get that vaccine first. In the meantime, funding was provided to the manufacturer to start manufacturing vaccine doses far sooner than they typically would. So again, because usually the funding comes from the manufacturer, they won't risk that kind of capital to start manufacturing really early. And in this situation, we will have tens of millions of doses ready to go out if the FDA does grant emergency authorization. In this setting, if the ACIP provides that recommendation, the vaccine will be made available, and we will continue the ongoing study of the phase 3 so that we can continue to see if the vaccine has duration of protection that protects people for long. We want to know that information. The other thing that we won't know about this vaccine when it comes out is we are hearing that it's effective against infection altogether, but at least symptomatic infection. But we don't know if it's effective against any infection in terms of people who might not have symptoms of disease. And so those are some things that will still continue to be determined. And in the meantime, those of us who have been vaccinated will still need to wear masks, and will still need to be physically distanced from others, especially those of us who are sorry, I'm looking at, we're running out of time, I'm sorry. Those of us who are working on the front lines and are getting exposed on a daily basis. These are the things that FDA is considering for the pandemic vaccine, that it's safe, and that it works well. That's the priority for them. They will issue, or they have issued special instructions to the manufacturers. There are certain things that they have to meet in order to get that vaccine considered for licensure or for emergency use. And the manufacturer must produce evidence that the vaccine is safe, that it's pure, and that it's potent. So those are some of the things. And as I mentioned, licensure is common, but we may see emergency use authorization. Expanded use access is something that could happen. It could be treated as an investigational or research drug, and it would require a research team and a review by the systems that would be providing the vaccination to make sure that there's ethical use of that product. The advisory committee, as I mentioned, makes the recommendations. They will be reviewing the scientific data and considering who will be benefiting the most from vaccination. Again, from the ACIP perspective, they also want to make sure that they are recommending a safe and effective vaccine. They want to make sure that this vaccine will diminish the spread and severe disease, and that it will be used to help us return to a normal infrastructure for society and for our economy. And they want to make sure that the vaccine is distributed in an equitable way, and that information will be shared. How they're determining that in a couple weeks. We'll talk more about that. These are some of the systems that are created for monitoring once the vaccine is authorized for use. And there are several of these. There's the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System is one of them that will be used. And there's going to be another one that we will be encouraging people to use through their phone, through text messaging, where they can check in with CDC and tell them how they're doing. And if there are serious symptoms, that there can be personalized follow-up with them. So those are the ongoing systems that will be used to monitor for safety. And that's all I have, and we've got a few minutes left for some questions. I'm sorry, this took longer than I thought.
Thanks, Lynn. That was really great. All right, Kathleen and Sarah, I know you two have been answering questions as they've come in, and you know better where we are in the list of questions. Do either of you want to read out the next question that you haven't answered yet and answer it?
Yeah, well, this question I think is for Lynn. And you might have addressed it a little bit when you were speaking earlier. The mRNA vaccines are reporting efficacy at less than 1 month after the first dose. Is this a common timeline to assess efficacy? Can you comment on what you think the appropriate duration is to establish efficacy for a COVID vaccine?
I think that because there's so much disease that is occurring that they can look at, those who got placebo versus those who received the vaccine and see what the disease patterns are. And what they were seeing initially was that those who had received the vaccine were not getting the disease, and those who had received the placebo did get sick. So that gives a really strong indication. Again, we would like to see out 6 months to a year to see if that protection holds. But we are seeing people getting protected from disease, and so I think we've seen first dose protection, but also we're also seeing now what happens with second dose protection. And I know that the one vaccine company that has submitted their data for consideration of emergency use is providing data after both doses and beyond the 2-week period. And some of that data will continue to come in, but they have seen enough data to be certain about the effectiveness of the vaccine, and enough data for 2 months post that second dose looking at safety, and have not been seeing any patterns of concern for serious adverse events. We do see people have side effects, meaning low-grade fevers, feeling lethargic, or having a headache the first or second day after vaccination. Those are very temporary.
Great, thank you. Maybe one more to have you on, Lynn.
Yeah.
I know we haven't really talked about prioritization yet, but in terms of that, do you think clinical staff who work directly with COVID-19 samples will be able to get vaccinated in phase 1 in a high exposure rate? From having that hundreds of thousands of samples per day.
Definitely healthcare workers are considered a priority. And we'll go into that more in 2 weeks, but be assured that those of you who have been coming to work every day and taking care of very sick people we are considered top priority for protection and vaccination. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. I'm seeing some questions about the vaccine itself. Kathleen will be coming on next week to talk a little bit about the vaccine schedules. Depending on the product, the schedules are different, but for the mRNA vaccine that is being reviewed right now by FDA, the interval between the two is 3 weeks or 21 days. The other mRNA product would be 28 days, and so that can be complicated, and we're going to talk about how to negotiate some of those differences next week with Kathleen.
Thanks, Lynn and Kathleen. So I know we're at time, so I want to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. I know we hit our capacity, and not everyone that wanted to join could join. A reminder that this is being recorded, and it will be on our website. For the next 3 Tuesdays, we will have more webinars, as Kathleen and Lynn have talked about. It'll be the same link and same password. And then we will be sending out an evaluation survey after this session, and that survey will have a link to your CEU certificate. So please fill out that survey, and then you will get your CEUs. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.